Okay, so welcome everybody to this morning's Business Unusual Topco podcast. Today I'm joined by Magda Wierzycka from Signia. She's a CEO and she's all the way in London. Welcome and good morning. Just about good morning.
Hi. Morning. Well,
how are you doing?
Well, how can any of us be doing in this lockdown situation? I don't think it's easy for anyone. And I think, the longer this goes on, I think the more difficult it is to see an end to this. So
I'm sort of torn every day between optimism and pessimism. And I don't like the pessimist in me. So it doesn't go well with my personality. But we were talking earlier, and we were saying that for me, my father was an entrepreneur, and we would travel between countries, New Zealand, Australia, England, South Africa, and he was very good at setting up new businesses all the time. He would be able to set up a business before he even moved to the next country. And I think it was because he came from the war and maybe all those sorts of issues that, very poor background. But I think, what I did realize is every time he does set up a new business, it does take time. Things don't happen overnight. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs who are looking for immediate success, immediate gratification. But life, unfortunately, doesn't work that way. And I suppose that's what concerns me a little bit, is that the time period that we have it's great to turn things off, but to get them going again, I'm worried a little bit.
Well, I'm very worried, not, a little bit worried. So obviously I arrived in London last week, but before that I, spent 5 months in South Africa in lockdown. And, I do think that never mind the path of the disease in Africa is different to what happened in Europe. But when, Cyril Ramaphosa stood up and locked the country down in March, I think I was the only or one of few people going, this is the biggest mistake ever, because, in an economy such as South Africa, where you've got such a huge reliance on the small and medium-sized enterprises, which is really entrepreneurial businesses, you cannot afford to shut those businesses down, because the human impact of that will be much larger than the impact of the COVID-19 virus, which is, very particular about, the mortality aspect of it. Unfortunately, politicians react to social media, politicians react to different pressures. But, a country like South Africa, the human cost of this lockdown and what has happened to people, poverty, hunger, crime, social issues, violence against women, all of those things cannot be underestimated, in the context of what has happened. And, that's very worrying and problematic for me.
I think there's two sorts of thinking, isn't there? I mean, there's the unions again today about the schools. I don't know if you saw, but
yes,
I've got the 3 boys here because they're not going to school, and I almost thought it wasn't worth the risk of going to work because of the travel. So I think that their experience of trying to lock the country down, though, has really been locked down. So everybody's able to cope with this lockdown, which is quite funny in a way. But I mean, how are we, is there, like Colin Coleman said to me about, in November last year, he came to an event of ours and he spoke about a social compact. Is that something that you think is sort of needed in this period? Do you think there's so much discrepancy between business, government and labor that we need to bring people together?
So I think that there was a time for social compact. And, I kind of made the point before when I was in South Africa that, I think in March, April, May, there was huge amount of goodwill from business, from just, the men in the street to enter into that compact with government to try and solve these things. And then you saw some, huge amounts of generosity in terms of the donations made to the Solidarity Fund. You saw Rupert's, Oppenheimer's, donating R1 billion each as family to the COVID relief projects. But unfortunately, given what has played itself out, and I so distinctly remember Cyril in his first speech talking about the fact that, every cent that will be donated to this effort will be accounted for, will be scrutinized, will not be wasted. And, people donated, executives at Signet donated salaries, we were right there. I even participated in a government infrastructure conference where I said, you've got such a spirit of being able to mobilize solidarity that, I do believe pension funds would have invested right there and then in any, tangible relief efforts that were put on the table. Unfortunately, and you don't have to go far, but to open the Sunday Times yesterday to know that the social compact, the willingness to enter into social compact with government was broken. So the looting that has taken place during this period of the very funds that we were promised will not be looted. The lack of supervision that has happened, where we were distinctly promised as business, as individuals, as citizens, as taxpayers, that this will not happen. And you see something like, 90 tenders in Gauteng along or Tshwane, where, again, money has been grossly inflated tenders, inappropriate tenders, wastage of money gone missing. I don't know whether there is a willingness for any social compact. And then, of course, you see things such as, for a social compact to exist, you have to have a willingness. It's not a begging bowl from government. And today, all we've seen is kind of a begging bowl and empty words, empty promises. You actually have to have some tangibility. And so I believe that business has to some extent and would have come to the table a lot more. I believe that taxpayers would have come to the table and have come to the table. I think government has failed. And then, of course, unions have not come to the table at all. And again, you look at, I think it was Tshwane, where the wage increases, they forced through. Some were forced through 6.75% wage increase in this climate last week. So what social compact, what social compact are we talking about? What's on the table? Because, I have a business in South Africa, I pay taxes in South Africa, I have property in South Africa, I have interest in South Africa, and I have to look at it from a personal perspective and say, someone needs to come to me and say, Magda, please enter into the social compact, because this is what we have put in place over and above what we have already said before I would come back to the table.
Is it a leadership issue? Do you think it's a leader? I mean, what gets me thinking is, so what's the solution? I can't help myself but think
solution
it's pretty dire, right? It's like the promises are made, and even the what's going to happen. It was like, we're going to get all the different bodies together, and we're basically going to give someone a slap on the wrist, and there was nothing clear. It wasn't like they're going to prison, we're going to take the money back, this is urgent. It didn't have that sense of determination, we're going to get you.
So I just have a sense that I don't know, that there's a parallel universe that we live in, and there is, because remember that at the end of the day, right now, the only people who have borne the brunt of this crisis has been the private sector and the poor. The public servants and government officials have had their salaries paid. Many of them sit at home doing nothing, on full pay. Nothing has happened to them. Private sector, whether it's, and I'm not talking the largest corporates, I'm talking about the SMEs. I'm talking the SMEs that are then employing the, people who live in townships, the vulnerable. Those are the people that have borne the full cost of this, pandemic and this lockdown, more importantly. I think that, look, the negatives are that I don't, I've heard the word social compacts thrown around for quite a few years now in different contexts. So, I'm fairly pragmatic on the social compact type, nice terminology. It's rubbish. So what is tangible in South Africa? I think there's certain positives, and some of them might not be kind of that apparent. One is that that this government is unable to go to IMF for a bailout, for a true bailout. Because if it did, then IMF would enforce cuts in public service sector, wages, pensions, social benefits, shrinkage of the public sector. So for all these reasons, the government ANC will not, or at least it will be absolutely the avenue of last resort to go to IMF. And I actually don't believe that IMF bailouts have done anyone any good. So you only have to look at Greece to see that there have been complete disasters. So they're not going to IMF for different reasons, but I think that's positive because they can't commit to the type of commitments that international institutions would require to grant us funding. We are very, very limited in terms of how much money we can borrow. That's a positive, not a negative. And the positive is that, to date, South Africa has benefited from the fact that the money we have borrowed has by and large been rand denominated and not dollar denominated. Now, if our debt had been dollar denominated and the rand has depreciated to the extent that it had, imagine the impact on the fiscus. So the fact that we are very limited in terms of, some relief funds from World Bank or African Development Bank, they're teeny tiny. So we are actually constrained in our ability right now to borrow in dollars. And I actually think that looking forward, that will be our savings grace. Okay, so there is that. And then, in the private sector, because South Africa is, a country of fairly resilient people. And when I talk about resilience, I don't talk about just kind of entrepreneurs or small businesses, but I also talk about people who do live in townships, who are vulnerable. Somehow they survive. And so I think that resilience will, be a savings grace in the sense that people will adjust. Whether it means having less, whether it means spending less, whether it means, some of the things that we have seen is, huge amount of generosity in terms of, most families, if they can afford to, are maintaining their, the employees that they employ, whether it's in a household, whether it's a small business, they're trying to help. So the solidarity and this kind of compact that you're talking about almost exist between, various sectors of the private sector without the involvement of the public sector. And I think that kind of, and then of course we've always had a very large informal economy. So that's the economy, and not taxes are paid, where businesses, be it spaza shops, be it someone selling fruit by the side of the road, and, be it illegitimate bootlegging, and it exists. And I think that informal economy is potentially what's going to get us through this time, not lead to a huge recovery, but at least, hopefully we are not going to see people dying of hunger in this situation.
I mean, I spoke to Davi Rood a couple of months ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago, and he basically felt that the opportunities are there because as government's trying to take on more and not being able to deliver, it's creating opportunities for entrepreneurs to then take on some of those opportunities and deliver and solve the problems that we have. So it's actually encouraging more entrepreneurship than what they're taking on. But I think it still brings some fears into our lives. How do you see, I mean, there is a sense when I speak to people that South Africa looks like it's going to come out in many ways better than other countries. And it seems that that's not felt necessarily when I speak to my friends or, people at the lower levels. So from a higher level people think, no, we're going to come up better. And I'm not sure if it's because, like you mentioned, of the borrowing. So because the UK is borrowing such high amounts, because the US is borrowing such high amounts, because their lifestyle is so high that they're going to be in a debt trap where we're not going to be in that same level of debt. Is it that? But then I look at the poverty that we've got here, the people on the ground, and I suppose that fear, there seems to be a fear, possibly. I don't know if that same fear is in the UK or America.
Well, of course, so let's look at in South Africa, I think the poverty has always been there. So there are greater levels of poverty right now. I think the middle class in South Africa has become lower middle class.
Yeah.
I think that, given what has happened to the rand, so I think the entrepreneurship that you're talking about will also come from the fact that the rand has depreciated. So everything that you import will become, and is now, so much more expensive, that you hopefully, that creates opportunities for domestic manufacturing, for domestic supplies. So if you can source goods domestically as opposed to importing them, you will. If you can make things domestically as opposed to, you will. So that's where the opportunities are. And then, from a pragmatic perspective is, our expectations are so low that anyone will come and bail us out. That I think as a nation, and I'm again excluding government or the public servants or the teachers' unions, but I think, as a nation, expectations are low. We know no one is coming to our aid, not the government and not anybody else. That we actually, to survive, and you're talking about 59 million people, we will have to make plans, whether it's in the informal sector, whether it's in townships, whether it's small and medium-sized enterprises, whether it's a corporate sector. Now, being in the UK, completely different picture. And, the picture is one of the government will provide. The furlough scheme in the UK, where basically, what companies have done is they furloughed their staff, which is basically they haven't retrenched them, but the government has taken over the obligation for paying their salaries till the end of October, provided that the person is not working. Because if they're working, obviously, it's utterly crazy. People are sitting on holiday without realizing that by October, their furlough is going to be retrenched. So people are being called back to the office. They're refusing to come back to the office. They're very happy, again, without realizing that bumps in seats translate into you potentially have a job in October. Your refusal to come back to the office potentially means that there's no job in October. But, then I was told, well, yes, but, even if the furlough scheme ends and I'm retrenched, I will receive social benefits. So, there's a little bit of a stigma attached to living on the dole, but the government will provide. So there isn't the same sense of, oh my God, I need to make a plan. In fact, there's no sense of it whatsoever, that I need to make a plan. But when you talk about fear and anxiety, and, I'm going to touch on a slightly kind of, sensitive matter, but I'm seeing a lot more fear and anxiety in countries like United States, and I'll talk to that UK, than I'm seeing in South Africa. South Africa, we know no one is coming. So we are already focused on how do we survive? What solutions do we make? Here, what you're seeing and the fear that, is manifesting itself in these mass demonstrations that you are seeing in United States and in UK. So I know that it needed a spark, and Black Lives Matter became that spark that unified people. But when I see, the mass protests of these angry young people in the streets, I'm seeing fear. I'm seeing people who have no jobs, who potentially have lost their plans, their future. They don't know what the future holds. People who have a job to go to on a Monday morning are not in the streets demonstrating and destroying. So fear here is very much here, but it's just manifesting itself in a different way. And that's, obviously not to say that the cause isn't worthwhile, because it is. And it, and it is a highly inflammatory spark. But I think people want to be in the streets because they want to be with other people who are in the same position as they are, so they feel less anxiety. Whereas, in South Africa, we haven't, apart from few minor protests, and I believe there's another one in Cape Town today, we've just gotten on with it, with making plans rather than thinking, okay, we need to march on Parliament.
For sure. So, one of the other things that interests me about you is that, as someone that's sort of come from Poland and almost an immigrant to South Africa, there's been a lot of sort of research around successful entrepreneurs, successful business people and immigrants. And I look at some of the xenophobia that's taking place in South Africa, but I actually look at it as an opportunity that you have so many immigrants in South Africa that are going to help us in our next wave of driving this economy. Is that something that you see, or is it something that you...
So, I don't think it's an issue of immigrants as much as it's an economic issue. So, and hence that talks to entrepreneurship in South Africa. The reason it's kind of been labeled as, and immigrants tend to be entrepreneurs, actually, that's the wrong narrative. It's people coming from a poor social economic background with few options who have to make a plan very early on because they've got no expectations that parents will take care of them financially or otherwise. They probably have had, kind of non-linear childhoods, disrupted education. They know that their parents have nothing and you will have to support your parents, and potentially your greater family. And we've got a lot of it in South Africa. It's not specific to immigrants. Whereas, in countries like UK, obviously, people grow up here, they go to school, they've got very linear childhoods, they've got expectation that parents, they can move back in with their parents. Whereas, my expectations when I arrived at the age of 12 in South Africa, and my father said to me, okay, that's it. We've got $500. That's all we have. We've got 3 suitcases. I need to focus on kind of rebuilding a life, but don't expect anything. You are on your own. So, by the age of 18, I had a full-scale bursary. I was completely financially self-supporting. By the age of 25, I was supporting my parents. But I had no expectations that someone will give me something, that I will inherit something, that, I can relax because at the end of the day, when my wealthy aunt dies or when my parents pass away, there's a house, there's a car, there's none of that. So you become a lot more self-reliant. But I think in a South African context, that's true not just of immigrants, but of vast swathes of our population.
I love that word, self-reliance. Actually, something I heard last week. We had a conference, and I think that it's that Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote that book about self-reliance. Really intriguing, and I think you're right. I think that's one of the things that probably brings about that resilience in South Africans. Is there's no really reliance, is there, on the state or anybody else? You've got to get off your bum and sort of make things happen. And for you to do what you've done, though, it's not been easy. It's been quite amazing. And I think I was doing some research and I watched a YouTube video and I was showing my son, he's 20, your story, and my wife said, don't turn it. She normally tells me to turn off my videos. Turn it off. She's like, no, put that on. And so your story is absolutely amazing. And I wish that more South Africans could see it. But there's not really enough women entrepreneurs, women business people who are leading the way that you're leading. Why is that, do you think? Because you've done it. So you have sort of risen to that opportunity, but there's not enough others who are rising at the moment to that.
Look, I think that's possibly not correct. I think there are women, but and I think they're possibly not enough. And again, I'm going to be, touch on sensitive topics. I think there are a lot of non-white women who have risen to the challenge. They're just not,
Do you think it's racially aligned then? More
Oh, I
black and
think there are
African
some
women are more
incredibly,
driven?
absolutely. I think that, if I look at South Africa and demographics of South Africa, there are so many strong black women,
Yeah.
leading the way.
Yeah.
They possibly are not as vocal as I am, but they truly are,
Yeah.
and they're
Wait.
spectacular women. I think my thing has been, perhaps, the fact that there are not enough women in financial services.
Yeah, maybe that's what I was going to say. Or IT.
Or IT for that matter.
Yeah.
And, there it's an issue of, I think you need a different level of resilience in both those industries. So, which don't necessarily talk to women's strengths. So, in financial services, I mean, I've started 6 different, okay, if I include UK now, it's my 7th business I'm starting in financial services. But, the very first business I worked in, Coronation, it was, there was a startup when I joined, but it was such a, men kill men or dog eat dog environment, that through my financial services career, when I employed very, very competent women, invariably they would resign.
Yeah.
And when I would call them into my office and say, why are you resigning? You are completely capable of managing money, of leading, of they would say to me, frankly, Magda, who needs this crap? Have you ever sat in the investment team? Well, have you seen the way men talk about women here? Have you seen this level of aggression where you're fighting for bonuses and fighting for money? Women like to work in collaborative environments. Financial services is not a collaborative environment. And hence women opt out of financial services. And then, IT, and again, I run, software development company and have for better part of the last 15 years as part of Signia. And there, I think it's again a different thing. The really talented software engineers tend to be extreme introverts. So, they would sit next to each other, but they communicate via some WeChat on the screen. Women talk. So it has nothing to do with whether they're capable or not. Of course, they're capable, but they don't want to work in an environment where no one makes eye contact.
Yeah.
Again, they opt out.
I've forgotten his name. Jordan, and he wrote the 12 Principles of Life, I think it was called.
Yes. Oh my God, that goes back. It goes back. Takes me back to my early 20s. I think it's one of the first business books I read. I had to work off my bursary at Southern Life, and I was sent on some course, and that's the first book that I was given to read, the 12 principles. That's correct.
And he talks around, and they ask him about gender empowerment, and he basically said he doesn't believe that women they've made a choice to not take on some of these opportunities. Yeah. It's not. And so either we've got to change those sectors to make them more, I don't know, not appealing for women, but certainly more humanize those sectors and take away some of the, I don't know, the toughness in that. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. It's you really would have to culturally change those organizations, because in financial services, I mean, if I look at my path through financial services, and again, it's not been a linear one. I worked in an environment where, I wasn't leading a company, so I couldn't set the tone. And, I can tell you, those were rough years of, you are being beaten up and beaten up and beaten up. And when I left Coronation, I said, never again. And that's where, I set up my first company. Then, that was bought out by African Harvest, but I was CEO of African Harvest. Then when I sold African Harvest, I started Signia. But I had a very clear mindset of, I will never have a male boss again under any circumstances. So I can build.
Be that bad?
In the financial services sector, yes. I don't want to work. So again, if you came into Signia, you would find that it's a very non-traditional financial services company. We don't tolerate infighting. We don't tolerate, the team of people I have with me, some of them have worked with me for 20 years.
Yeah.
And it's a completely collaborative effort. People might have a very different perception of me in real life versus what it is inside the business. When we make a hiring mistake in terms of bringing in someone not incapable, but someone who thrives on internal competition, and killing others in order to we get rid of them. My uniform message to the team is, guys, there's plenty if you want to fight competitors. There are so many competitors to fight. Internally, we don't fight. Internally, we collaborate, we help each other. If there is a problem, we bring it to the table together as a team. And if you need help, you put up your hand and you say, I need help. And 20 people jump up and say, how can I help you? So, that's a culture that I created at Signia, and it's a very, very non-traditional financial services culture.
Yeah, I'm intrigued with index funds. Obviously, in the States, it's growing in its popularity. You're seeing far more people investing their futures in index funds, but I'm not seeing the same level of that in South Africa, which is surprising. And so is it because margins are generally so high here that people think of the 2% commission and don't see it affecting them? But is it that? Is it a culture issue? I mean,
no.
I'm struggling to think, why are we not more infatuated with index funds? It's just ridiculous.
So, I've managed my first, I'll give you some of the reasons. So I've managed index funds. My very first index fund, I started at Southern Life in 1992. Southern Life, for those that remember, old insurance companies, many years ago. It was a failing insurance company, failing asset management company. I was a very young actuary. I was like, 3 months out of university. And they said to me, well, they've heard about this thing, index tracking in United States. And because the active side is failing, won't I travel to Los Angeles, learn as much as I can about, they sent me to some firm in LA. I remember it was during the O.J. Simpson trial. On the weekend, I went on a little bit of a tour of downtown LA. And, I came back a full believer in index tracking, which really was in its infancy. Reverse or fast forward to today. More than 50% of savings in United States is now managed on both institutional retail on an index tracking basis. In UK and Europe, it's around 30 to 40% and growing. The range of index tracking funds that's available, so the range of different products is so much wider in scope than what active managers can deliver. So to me, there is no other way of managing your savings in the listed space. If you want something that has the potential to deliver exponential returns, then you need to look at unlisted opportunities, which usually it's too complicated for kind of man in the street type investor. But if you're an institutional type investor, that's where the real, returns lie. So I'll use some very simple examples of, if you think, how much value was created in, Alibaba before it listed, Twitter before it IPO'd, Google before it IPO'd, Microsoft before it listed. That's where the true value creation happened. Facebook, that's what, so you wanted to be investing in those companies at those inception phases, not after it listed. So that's exponential growth. But for average investor, whether it's pension fund or whether it's retail investor, obviously index tracking is the way to go. And you will outperform, so S&P, and there is a website if you want to Google Google S&P SPIVA survey, SPIVA, and they run a wonderful website. I actually tweeted it so with the link, so this weekend if anyone's interested. But they run a wonderful website where they show different geographies: United States, South Africa, Brazil, India, Europe, and they show the percentage of actively managed general equity unit trusts that have underperformed the local benchmark. So United States, S&P 500.
Mm.
And they show the numbers over 5 years, 3 years, and 1 year. So consistently across geographies. For South Africa, you just need to click because they show a weird index in terms of the graph. But if you click on the full report, you'll see the top 50 index. The number is 80%. 80% of actively managed general equity unit trusts underperform the index. So if that's true, then the equivalent is to say to you, okay, please come into my casino. I'm giving you 80-20 odds on losing your money.
Yeah, I think it's worse.
Would you play?
Over 10 or 20 years, it's even worse. No one can get it right.
Yeah. So why is South Africa different? So in South Africa,
what is South Africa? What roughly are we investing in index funds? 0 or like?
Oh, no. Look,
4%.
it's marginal. It's marginal. It's less than 10% of savings is being managed on index tracking funds, but it's growing. So one thing I can tell you is that our retail side of Signia is growing exponentially with index tracking.
Okay.
But what are we fighting? We are fighting the fact that, South Africa is a small pond. And, reverse back to early 1990s, you had, effectively 3 companies today, but, there used to be a couple of more that fell by the wayside. Allan Gray, Investec, Coronation. Boutique asset managers then, large asset managers now. Average spend on advertising would run between 100 million to 180 million rand a year on billboards, on TV ads, so on radio advertising, so the subliminal message of top unit trust, Investec or 90, top unit trust. Have you ever seen a billboard which says, sorry, our unit trust is bottom performing? Top performance, top performance, top performance, top performance. How do you ensure it? Well, you launch 30 unit trusts and hope for the best. At any given point in time, one of them is going to be somewhere. And that's the one you advertise. Next week, it's a different fund on the billboard. You don't realize it driving through or driving past the billboard. Allan Gray, long-term underperformer, long-term advertiser of performance is a long-term game. Stay with us for the long term and we will deliver. Well, they haven't. But that doesn't stop the billboards. So because those managers started at a time when insurers were losing money was moving to independent boutiques, there was a whole consulting story. So consultants, financial advisors were selling these novel boutiques as well. People believe, if I turn to my 80-year-old mother and say to her, name some asset managers, she says Allan Gray and Coronation. So in the context of that, how do you compete? Particularly that with passive, your margins, of course, are so much smaller. We charge a fraction, a tenth of. Our S&P 500 index tracking fund charges 0.1% per annum. Versus an actively managed international fund, Coronation, Investec, usually the fee is 1.5% per annum.
2 to 1.5, yeah.
So look at the margin I have to spend on advertising, which is negligible, versus Allan Gray of this world.
And I know that you're also, I don't know if you're selling or you're helping people invest in Berkshire Hathaway.
Yes, just for fun.
Just for fun.
It's just for fun.
Have you met him?
No, I haven't met him. Obviously I've been to Omaha to listen to one of those crazy rambling, and I watched the AGM online. Thank God for COVID, actually.
I also did. But what interested me was when he talked right at the beginning, because I was also looking for a big investment to save some organizations. He's got like 135 billion on cash. And I thought, wow, this is his time to shine. He's been saving for a while, but then he hasn't invested. And then he spoke about the story about him when he's in 29, when his father was fired the day it happened. And then 9 months later he was born. And then if you invested that day he was born, 9 months after 29, that that the market, if you invested $1,000 in 2 years' time, it would only be worth 100. I think it was 130.
Yeah, it was a terrifying set of slides.
87% decrease in the market.
I know.
And I'm wondering, I don't know if you are, is the market going to turn again? Because I looked yesterday again, and I look at Apple higher than before. S&P almost where it was at.
I know.
Post-COVID, everything. Some of them are above. Some are above. Apple, I think Apple's maybe 20% above post-COVID. So it came down, it's shot back up again. Are we in for a Buffett shock?
So what's happening in the markets? And look, it's not dissimilar to what happened after the global financial crisis, but it's worse this time around, much worse.
Yeah.
You've got a complete disconnect between the share prices. I mean, the couple of things happening, but you've got a complete disconnect between what's happening in the stock markets, and I'll explain why, versus the economy.
Yeah.
The economy is plunging. The same corporates whose share prices are sky high, actually, the fundamentals are shot. And the fundamentals are shot because consumers are shot. You can strip away. I mean, I'm and I've always been in love with economics, and in particular macroeconomics. And to me, you can reduce macroeconomics and all the jargon, all the theories to one factor: consumer spending. And people are not spending. People feel poorer, are poorer, or are. So until you resolve that, the fundamentals, economic fundamentals are shot, and hence corporate fundamentals are shot. But in response to that, globally, central banks, like they did after the global financial crisis, have thrown enormous amount of money at the problem. So they've basically made loans available at negative interest rates. So they're actually paying you to borrow money. Now, the concept post-global financial crisis and now has been that if you give banks, free money, they will take that money and grant loans to businesses and consumers so that people can borrow money, spend, and that's how you restart the economy. Of course, that's not what happens in real life. The same banks, of course, they take the money because they can borrow it at zero interest rates. And what do they do with it? They speculate. They invest that money in the stock markets. And by investing in the stock markets, they push up shares prices. Now, in this space right now, what has, the share prices that have been pushed up are in particular technology shares. So you will find that although it's indices that are being driven up, like S&P 500, what's pulling up that index is companies like Apple, like Microsoft, like Google, like Amazon, anything that is perceived to be a technology platform company, something that can benefit from online sales, from virtualization of the world. So it's not the, bellwether industrial manufacturers that are going up in price. It's those companies, but those companies are now so large that they affect. Now, the fact that SAP is being pushed up by those companies then has the psychological effect on everybody else in terms of saying, if the US markets are going up, South Africa must go up. So everyone is buying. Everyone is feeling positive. So asset managers are buying shares, are seeing value. I look at some of this crap and I go, I'm seeing no value. I'm seeing risk to the corporates.
Where do you invest then? Where would you invest? Knowing what you know, where do you invest? In manufacturing companies? In agri?
Look, I still believe in technology companies. I think the tech giants are going to get bigger. I think, you need to look at sectors that will benefit from the current crisis. So anything to do with anything to do with online sales, but then auxiliary businesses, courier businesses, delivery businesses, it's all of those kind of auxiliary companies. You invest in healthcare, just because I think healthcare will become a major focus of governments worldwide. I mean, the pity is that we don't have many of those sectors available to us in South Africa. I mean, we've launched some tech funds. We are launching a healthcare fund on the 1st of August just to benefit from the theme where I think there will be a lot of government grant funding given to pharmaceutical companies, to startup companies looking at healthcare innovation. So that's certainly a sector that, one would be very interested in playing in. And obviously what you would avoid is anything to do with tourism, anything to do with, aviation, anything that is very dependent, anything to do with banking, anything to do with insurance, because those insurance claims are going to roll in. The bad loans are going to materialize on the balance sheets of banks. So you've got to be kind of, if you want to look at it from thematic short-term perspective, because long-term perspective, if you've got a 40-year time horizon, nothing about investments, you invest in high equity, hopefully passive fund, and like sink your skeleton 71 and forget about it. But if you are more of a short-term investor, so you're looking at a 1-year time horizon, 2 years, 3 years, then you've got to target themes. And and frankly, I've withdrawn. I was worried about overvaluations. Not that it makes me any genius. Neither did I anticipate COVID. But in January of this year, I pulled all my money out of the equity markets. I left money in some tech stocks. I invested in flexible income funds because of high yield. So I thought the yields were very attractive. And the rest of the money I pumped. And again, I did not envisage COVID. So I'm not any genius here. But I found a very exciting company in the UK called Oxford Sciences Innovation, and it's a company which is a joint venture between Oxford University, some leading asset managers. We managed to acquire some shares, and they basically have exclusivity on commercializing all IP emerging out of Oxford University. So they spin out companies, and most of the companies, given that Oxford has, is a #1 medical research university and life sciences research university in the world, most of those spin-out companies have to do with healthcare innovation. So I actually took a big chunk of my money and I invested that in Oxford Sciences Innovation, not envisaging the pandemic.
Well, you did well.
But, one of those companies is involved in the Oxford vaccine project. So, but
I mean, we had Lady Panda at our event last year, and I think what I saw for a little while now is there's so many books around founders at university doing their thesis and then launching their business as a student. They're seeing it on the ground. I mean, the names are known, and so what I also saw is in the UK, somewhere like Cambridge, also like Oxford. But I think it's something like, I don't know, I've forgotten the amount. It's like 100,000 businesses are funded at Cambridge. It must be similar in Oxford by the university. And that's both helping, mentoring these graduates. And I asked, UCT, all our universities in South Africa, why isn't the same thing happening? Is it an opportunity, Magda? Is it an opportunity to get behind our university, get behind our students, and start putting in fund together where we start also, because I saw what you did and I was like, wow, that's classy, and I'm glad you're getting the results from that risk, because it was ballsy to do it. But and I looked at that and I thought, wow, why aren't we doing that here? Or is it harder than that?
So I think it's a little bit different. Universities typically help academics. So whether it's in Oxford, Cambridge, some situation, you're looking at universities where the innovation isn't coming from 20-year-olds, with some behavioral app that they have developed, Instagram, TikTok, or whatever. You're looking at life sciences, which require a lot more research and years of research. But universities typically only assist insofar as registration of patents is concerned and registration of, protection of IP. The funding comes from venture capital firms. And if you look at Stanford University as the best example, because it's so absurd, Silicon Valley. Here's Stanford, known hub for computer sciences, artificial intelligence, machine learning. and you've got the Sand Hill Road leading up to Stanford, and there is a VC firm after VC firm after VC, like vultures surrounding the university. So you've got all these, and it is tech focused, so it is youngsters.
Yeah.
But literally, they spoiled for choice. They've got an idea for something.
Yeah.
They literally walk down the road and select their firm to talk to and pitch their business model. And those firms then take them inside, nurture, build the businesses, You know, in South Africa, I believe, you know, the only real kind of, and it's a teeny tiny fund, Stellenbosch University has a VC fund, or there's a VC fund associated with Stellenbosch University.
Yeah.
So I think it is an opportunity in South Africa.
Yeah.
You know, what's happening in South Africa, which is so sad, is where we've got these really, really bright minds, you know, be it in the, and it's easier to talk about it in the context of, you know, kind of IP associated with tech, because it's quicker to market, it's faster, it's easier to understand than talking to you about diagnostics, you know, that originate out of Oxford, or, you know, vaccine platforms, or, you know, there's a lot more hard science behind this. But, you know, tech in South Africa, you know, if you are a youngster with early 20s, and you've got some brilliant idea for a brilliant app, for a brilliant business model, you typically leave, you emigrate, and you approach.
How do we stop that? Because I agree, and then we get these brilliant minds that we've educated that leave the country when we need them to add value, and so everything's there. And so how do we change that? So that was the one sort of dilemma I'm seeing quite a lot. Like great minds.
No. So am I. Look, I think it's a combination of things. So capital availability and making capital available is one factor. But I think, you know, it's also the fact that it's not cheap and it's risky, you know, because in many of these ventures, unless you, and this is what Oxford has done particularly well with OSI, because, you know, the Oxford Sciences Innovation as a company nurtures these entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So they've set up a whole company to nurture, you know, the founders.
Yeah.
So you would have to set up exactly the same ecosystem in South Africa, where it's not just an issue of money. It's an issue of, because, you know, in most of these cases, these people have no idea how to commercialize a business. They have no idea how to draw up a business plan. So they might have a brilliant idea, but from that point on, you need to, and they can execute technically on delivery of an app, say. But to turn that into a business, which is commercial, revenue producing, you know, that takes mentorship. It takes business mentorship. It takes people with, you know, years of experience behind them to take.
Seems like sales is an issue.
So it's a collaboration type effort. So it's not an issue, you know, it's not just an issue of funding. It's an issue of business mentorship, of you know, say youngsters coming out of universities. And I don't believe that we've got a venture capital culture inside. We don't even have that as a sector. You know, there are no venture capital funds. It's not something that anyone has looked at or has done in the South African context. And look, I set up that business. I set up a venture capital business in London last year. And, you know, I'm still on a little bit of a learning curve myself. I mean, I've got the commercial experience, you know, so I can certainly lend the commercial expertise to this equation. But, you know, the idea would be if, you know, I can make the business in the UK a success, then I will have a template that I can possibly bring into South Africa and introduce it in South Africa. But, you know, I don't believe that right now, if you look at financial services industry in South Africa, that we actually have those skills, because there are no venture capital funds.
So, I mean, in doing my research on you, one of the things that came across really often was this word, well, this phrase, scanning the environment. And I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to leave with anything, right? Because I think that, your background is unique. I think your motivation is unique. You know, it's clear that it's been hard work that sets you apart. I think you're so highly respected. It's unreal in terms of combating corruption and being a voice for business. It's like we can't applaud you enough, really. But I'm just thinking on something that other people can take away from you. And I don't know if you've sort of worked this out, but it seems like when you were studying, you scan the environment. When you were looking for a job, you scan the environment. When you're looking for investments, you scan, and you said scan the environment. And I'm like, can you give us like 5 or 10 steps to successfully scanning the environment? Can you leave us with that?
Sure. So, you know, I mean, first of all, in terms of entrepreneurship, and I always say it to people that I encounter, because, you know, if you encounter an average 20-year-old and you say to him, what do you want to do in life? The answer is the same. I want to run my own business.
Yeah.
Now, actually, the world is divided into people who do want to run their own business and those that actually don't.
Yeah.
They want a comfortable job in a large company where they've got job security. You know, so first of all, recognize where you are, and there's no right or wrong answer. Recognize what type of an individual you are. Don't push yourself into entrepreneurship field. If actually what you want is a really nice job at Old Mutual, nothing wrong with that. Then go and win the battles in a company. If you're in an entrepreneurial field, then, you know, you need to be able to absorb as much information around you as you, so this is the scanning the environment, as you possibly can. And, you know, you're doing it constantly. So, you know, I wake up in the morning. Okay, I mean, apart from the fact that I then get on a treadmill for 2 hours.
I want to talk about that as well, by the way. Oh, we've got no time. But
yeah. You know,
I do triathlons. So I won SA Champs 4 years in a row for triathlons. Okay. So I can relate, but 2 hours on a treadmill.
Yeah.
That's tough.
I watch crime series. That's my fascination with corruption, and documentaries, and political documentaries. Learn about the world. So this is where macroeconomics comes in. You look at geopolitical events. You look at what's happening in business. You look at, I mean, politics. The convergence of politics and economics fascinates me. Because, you know, the in particular central banks, politicians have started to play a much greater role in business than pure capitalism has ever envisaged. So you cannot ignore, you know, you've got to look at economics, you've got to look at politics, global politics, and those forces. And only then do you actually look at the private sector and companies and, you know, what those sectors are doing. So I subscribe to multiple publications. I mean, absolutely, you know, anything from, you know, slightly trashy things like the Telegraph to, sorry, don't quote me, to, you know, Financial Times, to the Economist, to the New York Times, to, you know, Washington Journal, to Business Live. And so I start my day by scanning all the headlines and reading the you know, the articles that catch my eye. So I start my day with, okay, this is what has happened. This is what is happening. And often so I read a lot. You know, we are living in a culture where, you know, it's not about reading. I think it's quite difficult to get through a book. So I often find myself, you know, I get through the first 3-4 chapters and then I go to the last chapter of the book and I go, okay, I'm done. You know, so scan multiple sources, talk to a lot of people, because, you know, there's so much wisdom around. So if I find a topic that's interesting, I find a person that can tell me something more about a topic. Always recognizing that, you know, and I go back to that, you know, the book Blink and 10,000 Hours. I'll never become an expert at something. But, you know, what I'm seeing, and if I see a convergence of themes, then that sparks an idea. It sparks an idea for a business, or it sparks an idea for a product. And then, you know, this is the lecture I always give my kids in terms of scanning the environment is there to be aware, be part of the conversation, try and be part of the conversation. But once you've got that, you can also get to information overload. So you need to make sure that you can then bring it all together into, so if I see, because I scan so much, you will see very quickly that there is, at a point in time, there might be 3 topics that are where the convergence of conversations happens. So then I focus on those. And then the next step is to say, is there a commercial business opportunity in any of it? And if you actually think there is, this is where the bravery to make decisions comes in. Because, I've actually gave a lecture to my 2 university sons last night. And I said, there is only one thing in life that's black and white, and that's death, life and death. Everything else is shades of gray. You're living in shades of gray. And hence, every decision, whether you want to make it or not, and the world is plain, is full of people who don't want to make decisions. But any decision you make in life is a function of operating somewhere in that shade of gray and weighing up, here are the pros, here are the cons, here are the pros, here are the cons. Once you've done that in your head, what distinguishes people who become leaders versus the ones that don't are people who are willing to, based on imperfect information, make decisions. And it doesn't mean that it's always the right decision, but it's that willingness to make quick decisions based on imperfect information that distinguishes people who lead and people who follow. And
so to sum up what you're saying, it's because I've heard this before as well, it's speed's obviously a big thing, and it's rather make a decision than no decision at all. And then if you make a decision, don't feel compelled to stick with that decision. You can always change it.
Backpedal. The moment I have no qualms about having made a decision, 6 months down the road, going, what a stuff up. Guys, I'm the first one to say, wrong decision, reverse. Wrong decision.
And obviously, when you're scanning the environment, what you're doing really is you're getting data. So you're looking for trends, and you're connecting the dots almost in terms of data, and then you're making an assumption, an intuition, like, okay, like that's looking like it's going there, and then let's enter that opportunity.
Correct. And some of them might be terrible. I mean, I made a terrible decision around Bitcoin. I honestly bought into the story of this is going to be digital gold. We need to launch a Bitcoin ETF, Bitcoin exchange. Blockchain technology was going to be revolutionary. It might still be. So I'm not saying the concept of blockchain isn't solid. But is Bitcoin going to be the digital gold? I bought into the tulip mania, lost a lot of money in the process. Bought Bitcoin, lost money, started building an exchange at a point at which, the volumes of trading dropped off so dramatically that financially Bitcoin exchanges no longer made sense. So 6 months down the line, I basically quite happily put up my hands. I said, guys, waste of money, waste of our time, wrong decision. I know I drove the decision. I was wrong.
So, last question, I promise. But what do you see the future of Africa? How do you see the future of Africa?
Africa is a continent, and I think the Africa is not one solid. It doesn't have the same trajectory. Different countries will do different things, will develop at different paces. Some will be progressive, some will remain autocratic, kind of, despotic, corrupt entities. I find, so I prefer to talk about South Africa because I've always said, there's a tendency, just like Africa is made up of different countries with different dynamics. Just like Europe is made up of different countries, different cultures, the same thing applies to Africa. So I like to talk about South Africa because to me, South Africa is kind of a convergence of a whole lot of good and a thin layer of bad. And the thin layer of bad, unfortunately, tends to sit in government and steal. But, I don't believe that 59 million people in South Africa are corrupt. I actually tend to believe that 59 million people in South Africa are, honest, hardworking. They just want to survive. Yeah. They want to live. They want a thriving economy. They want to educate their children. They don't want to steal. So that corruption layer is actually very thin. Underneath it, every time I come back to South Africa, you have happy people, you have smiling people, you have people willing to help each other. There's so much positive energy around it, which it's just a pleasure. You go to a restaurant, people smile at you. You go to a restaurant in London, trust me, no one is smiling. So, that kind of optimism and positivity has a lot going for it, apart from the fact that, South Africa is one of the most beautiful countries in the world from natural beauty perspective. So if we could sort out a government and the way the country is run, and I again don't think it would take a lot, but unfortunately it would take a lot. On one hand, it's not a lot.
Blockchain could help that.
Yeah. Then, why would I want to live in, and I split my time between, as I said to you, London and Cape Town and South Africa. But why on earth would I want to, it's summer in London, it's 16 degrees outside, it's gray and raining. And I haven't seen a tree for a few days now. Versus I'm in Cape Town, greenery all around, a mountain in the background, ocean on the left, mountain on the right.
It's in front of me.
From a life perspective, where would you rather spend your time? In a kind of concrete jungle or in a real jungle? Or, in something as beautiful as South Africa? So I think that, if more people were a little bit, more engaged. And I've tried in my small way to become engaged in, be it, I've chosen the hobby horse of fighting corruption because, I just happen to be able to do forensic, analysis work on where the money where the money goes. But if there were more people calling out corruption from the private sector and the general populace, if people just rallied around the cause of eliminating corruption, holding people accountable, naming and shaming, I think you could build up a huge spirit of solidarity in South Africa, which could propel the country forward. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom, despite this pandemic that we're living through. I really, truly don't. I think with the correct leadership, and I'm not saying we have correct leadership right now, which is tragic for me to say, because I actually did think that we were on the right path, and now I think we're in a holding pattern. It's not as bad as Zuma, but it's nowhere near the potential that was expected. Then I think South Africa could thrive. I think some of the problems we will not eliminate in a lifetime, problems of inequality, we will not eliminate but things like poor education, with technology, with free data, with free cheap plastic laptops like Uruguay has done. You don't need teachers or teachers unions. You need one teacher on a screen.
But that's what they're scared of.
I know. Lecturing to the best teachers. You could have 200 best teachers in South Africa actually educating every single student and pupil in South Africa using laptops and technology right now.
For sure. It was amazing, and we're very grateful and honored to speak to you. We hope the weather turns in London for you. Oh, I know the feeling. Especially if you can't shop. The beauty of London is shopping, and if you can't shop, it's dreadful.
No, it's dreadful. It's dreadful. I'll be back in South Africa the moment the borders open.
Well, hopefully you can go to the pub and get a wine or a beer or something
I can get a glass of wine.
You can get some wine. There you go. Cheers to everyone in South Africa. We're all jealous.
I've got wine.
Thank you so very much for your time, and best of luck with index funding as well. And The Apprentice, we'll be looking out for you at The Apprentice, South Africa.
See if it's at all possible, given the pandemic. That I think is film production has taken a backseat to everything else. So if it happens, when it happens, I'll be there.
Thank you so much, Magda.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.